Hey there, here we are again for class from April Fool's Day. So April 1st, today's t-shirt is dedicated to one of the best Marvel comics of all time. It's 1970s stories about Dracula in the Tomb of Dracula. Some just really like outstanding comics. So before I get fully into the content today, I wanted to tell you about some of my favorite comics and some comics that I recently read because we're reading comics and, you know, it's like the book recommendations that I normally do. So I have also made a note of the time so that I can keep track because yesterday, well, the previous class that I did today, but the one that was for March 30th, Monday, was a little over 50 minutes. So I want to keep it under 50 minutes if possible. So I just finished reading Bitch Planet. So this is volume 2, this is volume 1. These are comics produced here in Portland by a Portland resident, Kelly Sue DeConnick, who is a really great comic writer. She lives here in Portland, and she's responsible for Bitch Planet, which is a feminist dystopia. And volume 2 actually introduces trans and intersex characters, I think for the first time ever in comics, but not in a way that fetishizes them, but in a way that just sort of introduces them as just, you know, characters, and they're just really, really excellent. I ended up rereading volume 1 as I was just getting into volume 2. This has won tons of awards. Kelly, I don't know how well you can see that, but has won a ton of awards here. I'm trying to replicate the dot camera thing, you know. So I don't know if I referenced the fact that you can see my very, very messy office. So, that's what it is. So, so then there's also the Tomb of Dracula. Which here I just have the 3 volumes of black and white, collections where Marvel started to do these inexpensive collections of some of their classic comics in black and white because it's cheaper to produce them this way. So these are like $17, and it's pretty nice. If you can handle the fact that you don't have the typical color like you have here, the lavish color, the art by this guy named Gene Colan is one of my favorite all-time classic comic book illustrators, because in fact it might have been better in black and white to start because it's very film noir, very, very dark sort of look at Dracula, which, oh, good that I pulled to this page, because one of the neat things about this story was that Dracula tried to sire a child. He took a wife and tried to create an heir. And so these are among, like, so this is how much you get, right? Some of my favorite comic books, if you like vampires, you cannot go wrong with a comic like The Tomb of Dracula. It's pretty amazing stuff. And why am I not get there? We go. So speaking of which, of course, there's always a blog post. So here's a picture of me when or do I have to open it this way to get you blown up version of this photo? Yeah, so here's a picture of me from back in Michigan wearing this very shirt with Satchel on New Year's Eve back in 2016. So I then did this blog post in which, there's always stuff, drinking green drinks. I did a post on national anthems and Fergie. Here's some basketball stuff. But I did a lot of Tomb of Dracula in this, so here's some of the cooler art covers that focused on this. This is the same image as the t-shirt. This is some really, really excellent stuff. So just to give you kind of a taste. And then I often use this around Halloween. Your class didn't take place during that time period, but to ask students who's their favorite famous version of Dracula, right? So I would probably say mine is this version from this comic book, but there's the 1931 Bela Lugosi. There's the 50s Christopher Lee, really excellent. There's Gary Oldham, there's the 90s. And now, of course, and I need to get through watching this. I'm doing more reading than watching right now, but I need to get through watching Warren Ellis's Castlevania on Netflix. The third season just came out and was top 10 in the world. I've watched the first 3 episodes like 5 times because I keep having to restart it because I, forget what happens. But really, really great. I strongly recommend it if that kind of stuff is your jam. So, I can just share my whole screen. How clever. So I actually have 2 monitors. This is the post on Comics Are Not Going Downhill, in which someone told me that comics were going downhill, if you want to read it. But I was going to show you my other favorite, my absolute all-time favorite comic book, and there's no t-shirt for this. But it's Warren Ellis. So to go from talking about Warren Ellis's Castlevania to this, and of course this is the secret word. So the secret word today is planetary for this comic book. Planetary is the secret word, and this is a fantastic archaeologist of the impossible. I'm working on a blog post to do a reread of all these issues because there's like 25 of them. So it's actually doable, and given it's my favorite, I was going to kind of do analysis commentary of every single issue, starting with this first one, which, as you can see, the art is just beautiful, so this group called Planetary investigates impossible things, and I'm going to try to page ahead here and get you. I don't know if I can get to it fast enough. But it's story in which he takes on old pulp story traditions, and so we get a character based on Doc Savage, who's called Doc Brass, and what's happened to him, and some of the other characters from that time period. This is Lord Greystoke, Tarzan. You get Airboy. You have Dracula. You have a variety of characters that are confronting this depiction of a computer that simulates multi-dimensional space and other universes. But it's just an amazing comic book. Does this thing give me a quick way to get to? Of course not. Anyway, planetary is today's secret word of the day and great comic book. So that gets you these things. Let's get to the agenda, so that you don't. Some of you are like, he's wasting my time again. So three comics. I want to show you some Watchmen ideas, a quick look at some of the characters and some of their storylines to get you thinking about the kinds of things you could write about. But mainly today, I want to talk about some basics of Jungian psychology, particularly the archetypes, and then I'll go back to Hero Cycle with a little bit more Jung in the next class, which will be posted tomorrow for tomorrow. So I'll be caught up to regular time and off my delay. Many of you have been posting, having attended class and took the notes, and I really, really appreciate that. I was hoping for some feedback, so send me questions, send me comments, more messages. There's not enough messages. You're all being so quiet. Even when I ask you, but when I asked you to check in, you did check in. So, that was cool. So what was the next thing that I was gonna, oh yes, Watchmen. So that brings us back to here. So see now, because it's over here, I'm looking over here, so that's kind of strange, right? but it does allow me to keep one thing on this screen while I have this other thing on this screen, right? So even though it looks like I'm sharing this, supposedly I'm sharing the secondary screen. How do I know? Yeah, supposedly that's what I'm sharing. I don't know. I think I'd be more comfortable if I'm sharing this way, just to make sure that that's what's happening. Again, since it's over on this screen, I guess I could move it so that I'm looking right at you, and am certain that I am sharing. Oh, see, now it's pausing because I moved it. So it's being persnickety. Yeah, you got to bear with some of these technical things, because we'll go into that there. Now I feel more comfortable that I'm sharing with you the thing that I want to share with you. So, so here is how Dr. Manhattan is introduced at the beginning of the comic. This is in chapter 1, and he's, you know, he's godlike. I mean, look at how huge he is here. In fact, I can do this. Look how magical this is, and focus in on that. Oh, I thought I could get it full screen. Now, by the way, so while I'm on this, so this is a great. We get a lot of information here. He's you know, godlike size. Laurie's here in the background. She's his girlfriend. Here's Rorschach has come in. We just get this line. There's nothing else. There's no, you know, overarching narration or whatever. But he's, you know, clearly is super, super powerful, right? If you want to cite these things, right? So use this number down here. So you get this number down here. This is page 20 of chapter 1, or issue 1, right? And this would be panel 1 of chapter 20, or excuse me, of page 20 of chapter 1, right? This would be panel 2 of page 20 of chapter 1. And so there's 4 panels on this page. So panel 3 and panel 4, right? And then you got 20 down there, you know, and so that's the number you should use. A lot of books will have a black number, and of course I'm here in a Kindle reader, as you can see, and so I have locations, right? But you know, one of the things that you should be thinking about, or that I think Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons hope we think about, is, you know, why does someone that's as powerful as Dr. Manhattan have a girlfriend? You know, if he has just, you know, ascended to godlike status, why would you know, a godlike being need sex? And so what's the answer to that question? The answer to that question is very interesting. And of course there's multiple potential answers to that question, right? So just taking that, you know, idea, you know, and if I was going to be working with Dr. Manhattan as my character, and of course I think Laurie is a more interesting character in a lot of ways, but if I were to skip ahead here, right, to this part in chapter, I believe this is in chapter 2, get to the right part here. When I get to this part, which I'm pretty positive is in chapter 2. I should have made a note. No, I think it's in chapter 3. It's in chapter 3. Yeah, because it's just into chapter 3. Yep. So this is chapter 3. Because the next part I want to show you is from chapter 4. So because we're getting the beginning of the pirate story here, which is something I want to talk about another time. But you know, get this really interesting part in which Dr. Manhattan is multitasking. You know, and so he's got 2 versions of himself here, making love to Laurie, and he's got another version of himself here in the laboratory, you know, and he's trying to make her understand, you know, works at an important stage, and it seemed necessary to, you know, multitask, and of course she is really upset, so she throws this beaker through him because he's immaterial, because none of these are the biological, you know, maybe one of these dudes over here was the biological, you know, original, but the others are just, you know, like holographic replicas, right? And it's really cool what they show that he does, you know, like this version of himself wants to talk. That might be the physical version. This version is upset that she's messed up the laboratory experiment, and so he starts to reconstitute the broken beaker, right? But you know, all of this whole sequence is like, why does Dr. Manhattan need a girlfriend? He doesn't seem super into it, right? He's doing it more for her, it seems. You know, he's just like, if you think there's a problem with my attitude, I'm prepared to discuss it. You know, like focusing on his language would be really interesting, right? But you know, so if I was writing about this at paper, I might take these parts, you know, that I've shown you. I'm starting to construct, you know, some ideas. I might jump ahead to this part in chapter 4. So chapter 4 is all about Dr. Manhattan. So it'd be a big source for you if you were writing about Dr. Manhattan. And of course, I want to try to talk about a lot of the characters here. But we go back to this part. So we're in chapter 4, page 17. And he does a lot of this in chapter 4, where all time exists at once for Dr. Manhattan, because he's achieved this new level of consciousness and existence, in which he's not focused on a linear progression of time, in which you know, you can only see one moment at a time and can't see the moment ahead, and can't clearly see the moment behind. Like he's in both of these moments at the same exact time. And so, you know, he connects this moment with Laurie to this moment with Janie, where he's first encountering Laurie. So we also get a sense for when he first got together with Laurie, which might have been around 1966 to 1985. So give us an idea, you know, she was like, say, 18 or 20, you know, so now she's in her early 40s. You know, but, you know, it's again the question of, you know, like he makes this comment about what it's like to kiss her and how great it is. You know, why is that important for this guy? Because previously here, you know, he can't even comfort Janie appropriately, right? Look at him, you know, and there's a lot of times where he's in this position with his arms to his sides, right? You know, what does that all mean? You know, as we start to contemplate his heroic arc, right? And there's a lot of stuff in here with timepieces, which I'll talk about. There's a lot of stuff in here with him kind of going into his own abyss. You know, Mars, you can see is the abyss for Dr. Manhattan because of the reason why he has to go there. Kind of he self-exiles himself to try to get perspective. And he gets a lot of perspective. He's looking back at Earth, you know, like he's literally looking back at Earth, trying to get perspective on this issue. So, or his life and his situation. So that gives you some ideas, I hope, for Dr. Manhattan. And I didn't really say much about Laurie, but I think she might be the next character I really want to talk about. Her arc. Stories are often called arcs when we talk about a particular character. And so I want to spend the rest of the class period today talking about some Jungian basics, give you some ideas about Jung. And when we talk about the hero cycle, the hero myth, or the hero saga, those stories about heroes, they reflect our own stories and adventures where heroes are tested and gather allies and face enemies. Those represent, through analogy and metaphor, our own struggles in our lives to grow in what Jung calls the process of individuation. And so what exactly does this mean? What is the process of individuation? And it's literally the process by which we become an individual. I'm trying to switch my share here so that I can tell you some more about it. Oh, no, it's not going to do that. I have to find the actual document. This is the one I want. All right. And so this is one of the documents posted in the classroom. It comes from a video, so you could watch the video if you wanted to. It's a good video. This is a transcript of the video, so if you'd rather just read it, you know, you know, maybe for me, I often find it easier because I can read it in a variety of orders and pick stuff out. Always easier for me to read a document than it is to watch a video, but I've discovered that a lot of people prefer to watch videos. The process of individuation is the process that we go through to develop our psyche, the hero stories sort of mirror that. And so there's lots of good stuff in here, but I highlighted the parts that I really want to share with you. So a good way to understand the natural individuation process, which just happens, and the more conscious way of individuation, which Jung psychotherapy promotes, is to consider the analogy of the human body. While our physical bodies grow and develop on their own without requiring our conscious awareness. We can, however, take a more, I hate when they do that, sorry, I have to interject. Instead of, however, we can take a more proactive conscious stance toward our physical development by exercising it properly. In the same manner, we can be more proactive in terms of the development of our psyche by taking certain measures which help accelerate the natural process of individuation. The difference between the natural individuation process, wrote Jung, which runs its course unconsciously, and the one which is consciously realized is tremendous. In the first case, consciousness nowhere intervenes. The end remains as dark as the beginning. In the second case, so much darkness comes to light that the personality is permeated with light and consciousness necessarily gains in scope and insight. And this is what Jung said was the purpose of our lives. It was to bring conscious, unconscious elements of our personality that we have repressed. He called these elements of our personality the shadow. And you could see it as light and dark, but not necessarily good and evil. Light as in conscious and we're aware of, and dark as in unconscious and that we are unaware of. But this is mirrored in a good and evil kind of dichotomy in a story like Star Wars, which is showing us the process of individuation of Luke Skywalker, and his struggle between the light elements he's trying to make conscious of the way the Force can be used for good, and the dark side of the Force, which is embodied by his father, Darth Vader, which is an unconscious element of his psyche, since he's unaware of the fact that Darth Vader is really his father for quite a while throughout the story, right? So what Jung is saying is that you individuate regardless of whether you do anything or not. You know, that you will progress and grow as an individual, and some of your unconscious elements will come to consciousness regardless of whether you do anything. But you won't individuate as well or as fully or wholly as you will if you put conscious effort toward it. And if you put conscious effort toward it, it's just like developing your body and being healthier. You'll be healthier because you're putting conscious effort toward being healthier. So as you can probably guess, my purpose for bringing in Jungian psychology is to encourage you to think about these ideas that are going to have great meaning and power to your whole life. When I discovered Jung as an undergraduate in religion courses in my first year of college, it was a huge revelation for me. It's become a very important part of my entire life. And if just one of you gets excited about Jungian ideas to the point where these ideas become a great part of your life, I'll have succeeded, because these are not ideas that Jung created in a vacuum. The ideas that Jung has put into Jungian psychology are connected to all these other ideologies throughout history. There's romantic transcendentalism here, there's Buddhism here, there's elements of Tao Te Ching and Eastern philosophies. There's lots of Christian elements, there's a lot of connection to the occult. It was used for dream interpretation, you know, it's very powerful. And so dreams is one of the places where you look at unconscious elements of your psyche, because that's where you encounter them, is in dreams. Because otherwise they're unconscious to you. You're not consciously aware of those elements that are in your unconscious mind, right? So the only time that we encounter them is through dreams. But here's this great quote from Nietzsche in his Zarathustra lectures. Our dreams are like windows that allow us to look in or listen in to the psychological process which is continually going on in our unconscious. And of course, there's dreams in Watchmen. And so that might be interesting to look at in a character story. Dan is the one where we see his dream. So later on here, and I think I only have 3 quotes to share with you at the end of the document, we have this. So for those who wish to begin on the conscious path of individuation, the first step is always the same. We must, as Jung put it, divest the self of the false wrappings of the persona. So the persona is the mask that you wear and you show to the world. And if you don't disassociate from the persona and integrate unconscious elements that you're not showing to the world, inferior contents, Jung would call them, versus your superior contents, which is the mask that you show to the world, then you're not an integrated human and you don't go very far in the process of individuation. So this is really the earliest step is to pull away the mask of the persona. Now this idea is of course very interesting when we connect it to Watchmen, because they all wear masks. They're all wearing masks, except Laurie, interestingly enough. But we can, you know, in fact, if the idea of the mask really grabbed you, I would allow you to look at all the characters and look at masks as an idea rather than just one character, because it's so interesting, right? So Jung, right, what we have here, the persona is the social mask we wear to fit into society. Is what I was just saying. Its formation begins early in life, as the pull of conformity causes us to identify most strongly with elements of our personality, which are in harmony with the social values of our day, while rejecting those that clash with social norms. So it's how you present yourself to the world in a heteronormative world, right? And so it's why we had the closet for so long, and we still have the closet. Honestly, you know, it's not easy for people to show who they really are to the world. And it's really brave and courageous when people do. And I really value that. I think that's really a wonderful thing. And we should all value that. So we should very much be encouraging and affirming toward our nonconformists, those that, you know, don't fall into the patterns of conformity and try to associate with this idea of normal. And a lot of you wrote about that in your middle sex essays, you know, like what is normal anyway? And why does there need to be a normal? And I really appreciated that. I thought that there was good thinking there by many of you, right? So the problem is that many people reach a point where they believe their social mask they wear, they believe where they are the social mask they wear, so that they are the mask. And this, of course, this idea really relates to Rorschach, right? Because he has this complicated relationship with his mask and a complicated relationship with being Rorschach. So there's this point at which, you know, when he finally opens up to the psychiatrist, where he says, you know, I wasn't Rorschach yet. You know, I was just Kovacs pretending to be Rorschach. And there's this particular point in which he becomes Rorschach. He closes his eyes, when he opens them again, he's Rorschach. And that whole sequence and concept has a lot to do with the persona, and then the inferior contents of the unconscious mind, right? And this idea of identity, you know, and it's a flip, possibly, you could argue, that in the end, it's the face of Walter Kovacs that's the mask, and the real identity is the mask of Rorschach, and tracing, you know, Rorschach's story is very fascinating, of course. That's why so many people, you know, choose it, and you are welcome to do so. Look very closely, you know, I hope you did, when you get to the unmasking where he's captured, and you go back to where you first saw him, because he's in the book, in his Walter Kovacs form from very early on. So you should definitely check that out. They believe they are the social mask they wear, and in so doing, they cut themselves off from the deep realms of the psyche. It is imperative, therefore, for anyone who wishes to take conscious path of individuation to accept that their social mask represents but a sliver of their total personality. One cannot individuate as long as one is playing a role to oneself. Now, which character, and it's not Rorschach, is playing a role to himself or herself in the story? And it's one I haven't mentioned today in this class yet, but you know, I'll just leave that out there for you to think about, right? Because there's a character that I think of immediately when I read that, who is seemingly far developed in the process of individuation, but truly not at all. So the convictions one has about oneself are the subtle form of persona and the most subtle obstacle against any true individuation. One can admit practically anything, yet somewhere one retains the idea that one is nevertheless so and so, and this is always a sort of final argument which counts apparently as a plus, yet it functions as an influence against true individuation. This is about rationalization. This final comment here by the author is about how we negotiate with ourselves about who we really are, and what we believe we really are, and we often do that by denying a part of ourselves that is still unconscious, which would lead to true individuation. This tearing off of the veil, as you know, and I like this final comment because it's what I always said when I've talked about this, is that we're like onions with many skins, and we have to peel ourselves again and again to get to the real core. And this is really the idea behind the process of individuation, that we don't put ourselves together in a jigsaw fashion kind of a way, that the self that you are when you are totally whole is already inside of you. It's like your nucleus, right? And you're just peeling off these layers that you have layered around it and put around it in the way of it. It's like the center of the Tootsie Pop is the same concept as the onion with the many skins, right? The skins are these unconscious repressions and elements and complexes and psychological pitfalls that you put in the way of selfhood as you developed, as you grew up. And that's why children are actually very integrated at a very, very young age until they start to individuate and create unconscious elements that they repress, right? So I always end up talking more than I intend to about things, but I hope it's valuable. I'm trying to tie it to our work, but I want to show you the PowerPoint, and I hope that I gotta flip it. All right. So I'm hoping this shows you the big view of the PowerPoint versus the presenter view. If not, you're seeing presenter view. I don't know. I tried to make it work. I didn't fully test this, I don't think, when I did my test. So anyway, there's a lot of stuff in here that's not directly relevant because this was my presentation for Middlesex. But you know, I'm going to whip through some of these earlier slides. Of course, you know me, and you know my blogging. You know, and so I was trying to define, ultimately, to talk about Jungian psychology in relationship to Middlesex. So I figured this would be somewhat relevant to you, to relate these ideas back and forth, and the complicated nature of where our concepts of gender come from, and my whole feeling that what we need to practice in the world is acceptance, not tolerance, which is why I shared this with you again the other day in an announcement. So this was created here in PDX land, and I just think this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, and definitely rules to live by. Love wins. Love always wins. It's the ultimate answer at the end of the Harry Potter books, right? You know, it's the power of love, Dumbledore says. So I talked about gendering and conformity and expectations and how these are driven by marketing, which is definitely something that perhaps you could have written about in Culture Gym. There was a great 1970s, I think it was a TV show, but if so, it was like a TV special, you know, Free to Be You and Me. Is meant to be, you know, encouraging and developing of particular self-esteem, led by Marlo Thomas, who was very popular from a TV show called That Girl back then. But you see, it's got quite a star-studded list here, including, you know, Michael Jackson as a kid at this stage, Dustin Hoffman, and many others, right? I was just picking out names you might know. I don't know if you know Alan Alda or Harry Belafonte or Rita Coolidge or Roberta Flack, but there are pretty awesome people also. So I related this a lot to my own personal experiences, because my gender was not always one that people could define easily. And then talked a little bit about the great examples of powerful women characters that we've had recently in comic books, with only one male example. Kind of got Wonder Woman hidden in the background there. Or this character who's, you know, a super powerful badass, you know. But then I talked about Middlesex, which, you know, you've all written about, and it may come back. Definitely there's going to be something about it on the final exam, you know, and it's quite likely going to be what is the final message about gender identity in this book, and show me how we get there. And show me the final message. So just telling you. So lots of different depictions of it. I can't decide which cover I like best. I actually gave away some books when I did the talk, and then talked about words and how we use them. You know, homosexuality being a word that was from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders that you see on here, which was it was a name for a mental disorder, and it was in this book for a really long time until it was removed. And so we don't want to use that word anymore. I don't like sexual preference or orientation either. I prefer sexual identity. And then LGBTQ is which should also include non-binary and intersex as well, which are probably all caught up with queer. But gender affirmation therapy, gender confirmation surgery, I think I told you about when we did Middlesex. So is there a gay gene? They're still looking, but you know, it would certainly validate that it's part of our nature, though some people don't want it validated genetically, because then it removes the fact that some people chose their identity. I don't know how I feel about that. I could see both arguments. So there's also some great stuff in this book about evolutionary psychology, that we've developed through evolutionary development, some psychological behaviors. But I won't do much with that. But we have to, sort people and put them in boxes. And I think I did tell you, I told you about the pink blue thing. I remember telling you about that. And my argument that there's as many genders as there are people, and this great graphic, some of which are really, goofy and funny, but they're not all like real specific genders like Hellboy. It's pretty great there. But so in Jungian psychology, so now I'm bringing it back. So I'm ready to talk to you about the thing that I want to talk to you about, which is the balance of the yin and yang, right? Which is directly out of Chinese philosophy and a large part of Tao Te Ching, which is usually a book that I promote during the semester. And of course, Jung was very much steeped in a time of heteronormative behaviors. He was Swiss. He was born in the late 19th century in Switzerland. His father was a Protestant minister, and there was very strict heteronormative concepts, and so there was probably some homophobia, in his consciousness. And I think we should be somewhat forgiving of him, since it's not in any way vicious or virulent in his writings. But Jung said that everything is a spectrum in our psyche, right? And so one of the spectrums is feminine, masculine. And we all fall somewhere on the spectrum. If your persona is feminine, and that's the face that you show to the world, and that's how you identify, which is why I love that language now, right? Because it's your identity, then you're over on the female side of the spectrum, right? But how close are you to that midpoint? How many masculine characteristics do you have, and that you've integrated? Because what Jung says is that if feminine is the face that you're showing to the world, then your masculine characteristics are inferior and they're part of your unconscious mind. And the goal of the process of individuation is to make conscious those repressed and inferior unconscious characteristics of your psyche, and integrate them together so that you're whole, right? And it's not just the masculine feminine duality that you need to do with that. So some basic Jungian stuff here I got about 20 minutes. If I'm going to go a full, well, actually that would be a full hour. So I'll do what I can here. I'll end at an appropriate time. I was excited when I came to Portland to find out that there's a Jungian society. My wife and I have joined, and they have lectures. Of course, they're not in operation right now, but they have this Oregon Friends of Jung. And then there's this really great book introducing Jung, which is a picture book, to identify adult concepts. I may have shared this with you before. I don't remember everything I've done in our class because I do it in so many different classes. I get mixed up. But some of the images that are to come are out of this book. So in all chaos, there's a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. So I already told you about Jung, 1875, 1961. Along with Freud, one of the founders of psychology. Often Freud is considered the father of psychology, and Jung coming after. But they were such close contemporaries that even though Freud was basically first to the party, Jung had as big an impact on psychological thought, if not more so, than Sigmund Freud. He interpreted about 80,000 dreams. And his dream interpretation, are where we get all the archetypes and these ideas about the hero myth, which use archetypes to look at the structure of hero stories. This idea of archetype is more profound than anything that Freud came up with. And of course, that is very much my personal opinion. Some Freudians would argue with me on that. But Jung delved into thousands and thousands of dreams from people from all over the world and discovered some interesting things, as I'm about to share with you. So his major work is on the screen here. Collective unconscious and archetypes, which I'm about to talk about, but the personality types also. So the Myers-Briggs personality test, which sorts people into the main three dualities: extrovert, introvert, intuitive, sensation, thinker, feeler. It is a personality test that's used all over the world by many people still today. Often when you apply for a job at a big company, you have a personality test to see how well that you may work in teams, or what kinds of teams that you need to be part of, or what your role in teams would be. There's not enough valuing in our culture of introverts, which I know I've talked about, but this was an enduring work of Jung to create these ideas about the personalities, which in the past I've done more with in terms of student writing, but not so much now, and especially now that we're online, you're missing out on some of this content. Every day, Jung would draw a mandala. He would draw a mandala to express his inner self, the state of his consciousness. He wrote, "My mandalas were cryptograms concerning the state of the self, which was presented to me anew each day. I guarded them like precious pearls. It became increasingly plain to me that the mandala is the center. It is the exponent of all paths. It is the path to the center, to individuation." So it's the same idea of getting to the core, the middle of the Tootsie Pop, peeling away the onion layers. And it's see, it's very much a nucleus, and there's like a circular theme, and there's different components, so that gives you some visual ideas, behind this, right? So this is the main stuff that I talk about. I'll give you a little bit of Freudian psychology along with the Jung. The idea of the personal unconscious and the complexes versus the collective unconscious. And then the archetypes. And the main archetypes are the persona, which I've already mentioned, the mask you show to the world, the anima and the animus, which are the masculine and feminine sides of the consciousness, the shadow and the ego. And the shadow is the dark side. The shadow is the unconscious elements that you've repressed. And so this all gets us to the process of individuation using this painting by Magritte, because he's probably my favorite artist of the fine artists, a surrealist from France in the early 20th century. So I've already talked about this process of assimilating or integrating elements of your unconscious mind and having psychic growth to become whole, right? I think the stuff that I might say is stuff that I already said. Like, it doesn't require any conscious thought by the individual. It just happens naturally. But if you put conscious thought toward it, you'll develop more. You can, of course, impede it by being in denial about things that you need to assimilate or integrate. We're masters of denial and rationalization. As was said in one of the best movies ever. Bonus points if you can find out what movie. I'm actually even not going to tell you, but a character says rationalizations are more important than sex, and another character responds saying, "Oh, come on, nothing's more important than sex." And the first character says, "Oh yeah, try to go a week without a rationalization." It's very true. Rationalizations are more important than sex. So the psyche is underdeveloped, undergoes the process of individuation to become a self. And it's the process through which we discover the unconscious mind. The psyche, the word that Jung gives for the whole of the psychic system of who you are, comes from the word psychic, which is Greek for soul. And maybe something I'll elaborate on in the future is how these ideas are Gnostic and they feed it. So remember how I said that that Jung is not creating these ideas in a vacuum, and instead he's creating these ideas from ideologies that already existed. And I mentioned transcendental romanticism, I mentioned Tao Te Ching, I mentioned Buddhism. Christianity, of course, is in here, but Gnosticism is also in here. And those other ideas feed into that as well. And alchemy, he spent a lot of time studying alchemy. And the central concept of Gnosticism is know thyself. And is it like Jacob's ladder? So I'll just leave that hanging as a question, because I'm trying to speed this up, because I'm at 50 minutes right now. So I think I'm going to go over because I want to get to the end of this, and I don't want to do this in 2 parts. But I'm going to have to speed it up a little bit and do it in 10. But I already posted this with the other Jung PowerPoints, which I'm going to get into Friday in the classroom. So this is the structure of the Freudian psyche, right? That the id is the manifestation of the libido. It's the want system. It's the desire system. It's the thing that infants are when they're first born. They're just the id until they start to develop the reality principle, and the ego then negotiates with the id to get things for the conscious mind, because the ego is partly conscious and partly connected to the unconscious. And so then the baby starts to develop the system to get the things the id is saying that it wants, which becomes sexual when the person grows up and enters puberty. Eventually, however, people are supposed to develop a conscience, which in Freudian psychology is known as the superego, and it sort of controls the ego id system, because you can't just take what you want. There are rules in society, and so you have to obey those rules unless you choose not to, because your superego is not very well developed, or your superego is terribly damaged, so that things that are wrong to do you actually think are good, which is where we get serial killers, and that gets more complicated to describe all of this. But in Freudian psychology, you just have the conscious mind, this sort of pre-conscious layer where dreams take place. Some people call this the subconscious, though technically that's not correct. And then the unconscious mind, where there are repressed elements that are sending you messages in the form of dreams, which you have to decode, because dreams are symbolic. Dreams are not literal. In Jungian psychology, it's a little more complicated. He also has a personal unconscious where we find the complexes. Like the Oedipal complex is a famous complex in Freudian psychology. But we also have the collective unconscious, where the archetypes exist. And this is the entire psychic world of the individual. You see here the persona is the outward face. The ego is the operating principle between the unconscious and the persona. But then we get the shadow, which is the opposite of the ego down here in the unconscious mind, both in the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. And as well as the ideas of the masculine and feminine, and those sorts of things. So I might have to do this in 2 parts. I might be better off just stopping and picking this up on Friday, because I don't want to overdo it. So, okay, I'm gonna, and for file size, take mercy on you. So we'll pick it up here on Friday, and let me just wrap up what I want to say here. And try to give you some ideas to take with you from this class about what the collective unconscious is. So different than the personal unconscious. The personal unconscious is the unconscious mind that holds all the things that you, through your experience as a human, have made unconscious, right? And so when you have dreams, you often have elements from your personal unconscious that come to you in dreams. Like I have a lot of theater dreams because I have theater experience, and I was a theater major in college, and so I have a lot of those kinds of dreams. That's part of my personal unconscious. Farmers will have dreams about farm equipment. You know, you often have dreams about the things in your life, you know, work, family, those sorts of things, right? The collective unconscious is the collective unconscious elements of us as a human race, or possibly even of the life force itself through which we're all connected, that everything is connected, you know, the entire planet and all of its contents, or the entire universe. You know, you can get very spiritual with these ideas. But just on a human level, the collective unconscious is the connection of all human beings throughout history. And we are connected to this repository of experiences and unconscious elements, which is why the dream interpretation of people from different cultures that had no communication with each other whatsoever had a lot of commonalities because of the collective unconscious. And so Jung, this was one of his major ideas that he created, and I think it's a really fascinating idea. It itself might not be part of either Binti or Watchmen, but the ideas of the shadow, the anima, the animus, and other kinds of archetypes are ideas that we could use to interpret those stories. And so more on that on Friday. Thank you for your kind attention. I'm, as always, your faithful servant here in Concordia University as we come to a close. I appreciate you sticking with me for the entire class period. I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.